As I grow closer and closer to complete decrepitude, I require more help all the time. I was going to just mention, it's interesting to hear these faith stories. They're always such a blessing. But I have a faith story too, but it's much unlike. In fact, I was thinking, is Rebecca Martin in here, or did they go?
She's gone.
She's gone. Okay, then it's probably just my wife and I who have always been in the Church of God, Abrahamic faith. I was born on July 20th, 1941, and that next Sunday I was in church in Eden Valley, Minnesota. And I have been in church almost every Sunday since. Actually, I'll have to confess my sin. I wasn't last Sunday. I was in Chattanooga, and we had a Sherlock Holmes convention that I have run for 10 years, and this was my last one. So I'll be in church next year on that Sunday. It's always a question to me, what needs to be spoken about as we come to the end of a wonderful conference like this, a huge blessing that I receive, and like I said, I've been in the church all my life, but to hear these stories and the troubles that some of you have experienced strengthens me and encourages me, because I've been through struggles myself. But what came to me to speak on comes from the story of Esther. And it was interesting, Barbara, you made reference to words that she spoke yesterday, because that is from the chapter 4 of the book of Esther, one, by the way, which doesn't even have the name of God in it, the whole book, but it has the work of God in it. And that's what I want to talk about this day. Now, you know the story of Esther. It isn't anything new. You had King Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, your name is correct, and he was a powerful king, going all the way to India, all the way down to apparently Ethiopia or Kush, and he controlled. And he gathered the people for a huge banquet. It went over a year long in the beginning, and then they decided to have a real feast. And he did for his special guests. And he had his queen Vashti have one for the women guests. And they were having their time in their cups. In fact, it tells us that Xerxes was deep in his cups. That means he was drunk. And he called for his queen. She was a beautiful woman, and wanted to parade her for the men to look at and admire and be jealous of him. Vashti, to her credit, said, "No, I'm not coming." Well, that bothered the king. So he called together his council, and they said, "What are we going to do about this? Here we have the queen defying the king, her husband." Well, the council said, we have to do something about this. If we don't stop this now, you know what women will be like to all their husbands. Well, evidently they didn't get stopped, did they? Yeah, at any rate, moving right along, he said the only thing we can do is depose Vashti's queen. She can't be queen anymore. I mean, anybody who would defy the king, no, she's out. So we're going to have a big search for someone who can be the new harem mate, and perhaps I will find a new queen. Well, that's the story. Esther, who was a Jewish person, or she was from that persuasion, she was told by Mordecai that she should not reveal that. So now let's set the stage. We have King Ahasuerus. We have Haman, who is one of his chief counselors. We have Mordecai, with his relative, whether she was a niece or we're not just sure what the relation was, but he had raised her, and her name was Esther. Now, though, she has been moved into the harem. And it's much more difficult since she has been selected as new queen, whereas before he could occasionally talk to her. Now, she can't even talk to him, though he is her close relative. So, Haman, nefarious Haman, has devised a plot to kill Mordecai, who won't bow down to him. To kill Haman, and while we're at it, let's kill all the Jews. The Hitler of his day. What is going to happen, of course, is where I'd like Carlos and Sarah now to read the conversation of that time.
Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was.
So Hathach went out to Mordecai to the city square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him all that had happened to him and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her and to order her to go into the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther.
Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai, "All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he might live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days." They related Esther's words to Mordecai.
Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this?"
Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast from me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish."
So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's the essence of the story, of the message that I feel I want to share with you today. We know how the story goes. She did go into the king. The king was unaware of what Haman had plotted. When it was uncovered, again through, I believe, the hand of God at work, that Mordecai, I always pronounced it Mordecai, I'm sorry. I will continue with my pronunciation since it's of course correct. Mordecai had saved the king's life from assassination. And the king said, "We've got to do something." Haman, come in here. Haman, what has been done for a man who we should honor? We should give every honor to. Well, Haman, of course, thinking it was him, said, "Well, I've got some ideas." And King Xerxes said, "Do it. Do it." The man's name is, and Haman was swelling with pride already, is Mordecai. And in humiliation, Haman was forced to do what the king told him to do. Now, what are the lessons here? Because it isn't just this story, although the Jews to this day celebrate the event, one of their feast days. But they celebrate because God saved his people. Now, think through this whole story and see God's hand. Xerxes already had a wife, a beautiful wife, a wonderful wife. He was the all-powerful king. But God's plan was already in place and would not be thwarted. Vashti had to go. In order for her to go, she had to have a sense of decency that says, I will not show myself as a strumpet. So she was deposed, and in her place came Esther. Well, certainly an honor position to be part of the harem and be the queen. Well, we would say that's a strange situation. But in that day and age, that was the way God was working. And now Esther is in this position to be queen, and Mordecai becomes aware of the plot of Haman to destroy him and the Jews, all of them, throughout the empire, across the empire. What should we do? Well, wait, now we have a chance here, Mordecai said. If I can get a message to Esther, perhaps Esther then, because she's now queen, can go in and get the king to spare in some way me and the people of God. Well, Esther said, no, I can't do that. You know the law. If anybody goes into the king's presence without being called for, well, they'd be killed. Well, unless he puts out the scepter indicating his pleasure. I'm not going to do that. See, I've taken a chance. It's been 30 days since I've been in there. I'm not going in. And this is then when those potent words of Mordecai are passed along to her. Who knows? Who knows, Esther? If you don't do this, God is going to raise up something or somebody to somehow save his people. God will not be thwarted in his intention. Oh, Esther said, I can't. Mordecai says, who knows, but that's why you were in this royal position, so that you could be this part of God's plan. Oh. Esther had to think that through. Finally, those courageous words that Barbara cited yesterday. Pray for me. Get together and pray, and I will go in. If I perish, I perish. There are 4 principles that I'd like to take from especially this part of the story, but the whole story. Number 1, there was in the beginning, and I'm talking about Eden, there was back then, and there is today, one who detests God and detests God's people and detests and hates anyone who would take a stand for God. He is called Satan. He is called the devil. He is called the serpent. And he is with us today. today too. Revelation 12:12 uses the interesting phrase, the devil has come down in great wrath, knowing his time is short. So if already back then, Satan hated God's people. He hated Adam and Eve. He deceived Eve, and Adam willingly went along, and the curse came upon the human race. Now he worked in Haman's heart so many years later to try and find a way to destroy the Jews, God's covenant people. Now, understand, he hates God. He hates God's people, and he is willing to do almost anything to destroy them. And so he is quite willing to do so today. But as Mordecai became aware of Haman's plan, so we today are aware of his plan, of Satan's plan. Whoever Haman might be in our lives today, Satan is behind it all. He seeks to destroy God's people. But God's will is that God's people will be saved. And he already provided that for us, we know, through his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, who's our Messiah. The problem is, in that day, the King Xerxes sent out another edict. The first edict had come through Haman, that all the Jews on this given day could be slain. Well, he couldn't rescind that edict, but he sent another one that said, God's covenant people can take a sword and be prepared, if need be, to defend themselves on the day when Haman's plot comes to pass. God always has a way for his people. We are his people. The Jews were his people at that time. God has a way. He always has a way. Remember how Esther first demurred and said, I can't do that. Mordecai says, why do you think you're here? You think it's just coincidental that you were made the new queen? You think that your place coming to royal attainment, that isn't going to exonerate you and make you safe? Now, from those four lessons that we see in the story of Esther and Haman, Mordecai and Xerxes, we can learn four principles for our lives today. Because number one, Satan is still at his evil work amongst us. There is lies out there in the name of Christianity that are not true. There is sin and immorality in our world that is shameful and not God-honoring. Satan is preparing to destroy everything and everybody just to show God that he is the prince of this world. We need Mordecai's today who realize the dangers that face people who are unaware, like the Jews would have been had they not been alerted and prepared to defend themselves. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go and purchase a sword, even a short sword, at a Renaissance festival. That's not what I'm saying, but I do think that you need to be prepared to defend the faith that once was delivered to the saints.
Yes.
A few years ago, I preached out of Jude. Jude said, I wish I could write and we could share about the exciting news of the kingdom. And we've done that today. But Jude also said, I felt I had to write and urge you to contend for the faith. And that today is what I believe we need to hear, a clarion call. It's time to stand up and be heard in a world that doesn't want to hear, in a world that doesn't know the danger that it's in. And if we perish, we perish. Oh, but I don't want to do that, and neither did Esther. And Mordecai's word should come to us as they did to her. Why do you think you were privileged to come to know the truth of who God is, who His only begotten Son is, of His coming kingdom, so that you could sit in your little groups and say, oh, isn't this wonderful? And it is. But it is time. And as much as we don't know when, I believe the coming of the age is coming to a close. When? I don't know that. But we have an amazing opportunity. And we're coming to find that out through the internet. And I believe this is of God too. Not Al Gore, but of God. That allows us to go all the way, Ray, you said, to South Africa, Hungary, Russia. We're finding, I believe you told me, Dan and Sharon, that you even get from all over the world people asking, what is this about? Now, not all will be reached, obviously. But there's one thing that Esther needed to know that we do too. We have been invited, as Esther was, to take part in what God is wanting to have done. But as Esther, we could choose to say, I can't do that. Or we can realize that it's been our privilege to know these wonderful truths, to speak boldly, to speak honestly, to speak openly, from youth to old. Now I'm at the old. I'm 72 and with my health issues, 90. I'm getting older every day. I'm not as old as Anthony, but he certainly looks younger. Thank goodness for it. But we all need to do what we can do for as long as we can do it, and as boldly as we can do it, with the call that if the truth is there, you need to know the truth. Paul says, why are they perishing? They perish because they do not love the truth, and so be saved. Do you have to know all the truth? I don't know that we all know all the truth. If we did, we could displace God. Satan tried that. Doesn't work. But we do know the truth that needs to be known. We know what needs to be told. And even if we perish, we perish. Living in the United States of America, I believe we have huge blessing of freedom. It's disappearing, and it probably will disappear. But as of now, and in England, and even in Australia, at a cost, we still can proclaim the good news of the gospel of the kingdom that will be planted on this earth as our everlasting possession. And you have an opportunity to be a part of that royal position, or you can choose not to be. What a frightful prospect that is for those who would choose not to be a part. I hope that we can all be challenged to do our part, whether it is as wide as Anthony's influence has been, or as mild as some of our influences may have been. But that we can be faithful and realize we've been called to a royal position for a purpose. And if we don't do it, God will find a way for His will to be done. We just have been invited to participate. If we perish, we perish. God bless you.
Jerry packed out. I don't know if we can do